Good morning, everyone. So I'm delighted to welcome you today for this international symposium, so Nutritional Determinants of Health, Recent Research, Discoveries and Translation into Public Health Action. Before I let the floor to our outstanding speakers, I would like to introduce today by sharing with you a few thoughts, ideas and recent results from our research team. So the most loyal of you will recognize some of the points that I've raised throughout this chair, which began at the beginning of April and which ends today with this symposium. These elements are a few points that I would like to put into perspective today, and I would also like to provide our international colleagues with some insights about what's going on in France. So nutrition is a fascinating topic at the crossroads of socio-anthropology, of culture, politics, economics, and art, and of course, health. Our health, but also the health of the planet. These art photographs taken by Greg Siegel and published in 2019 in his book Daily Bread, What Kids Eat Around the World, illustrate the weekly food consumption of children. They highlight the extraordinary diversity, both qualitative and quantitative, diversity of dietary profiles around the globe, and diversity that can also be observed within a same country, as we can see here in Brazil, for instance. So, in France, over the life course, we ingest an average of 30 tons of foods and 50,000 liters of drinks. They provide us with essential nutrients, so proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, but also a whole range of bioactive compounds, such as polyphenols, food additives, contaminants created during processes coming from farming practices or from packagings. And today we still have little idea of the impact of these compounds on long-term human health. But although we still have a great deal to understand and discover about the impact of our food on health, we have made extraordinary progresses, over the few last decades. So we can see here just how far we've gone when we look at these old commercials, unshamedly extolling the virtues of donuts, ice cream, milk chocolate, or soda. And a little parenthesis, progress has also been made in terms of women's place in the household diet. And fortunately, this type of advertising is no longer possible today, at least in some countries. So, we owe this better understanding of nutrition-health relationships to research. Research in all its diversity, methodological diversity, so epidemiological studies, such as ecological studies, case control, cohorts, randomized controlled trials, but also experimental approaches in vivo and in vitro, which have revealed a multitude of mechanisms underlying the relationships between nutrition and health. Some of them, such as the inflammation pathway, insulin resistance, oxidative stress, metabolic perturbations, and dysbiosis, appear to be shared by many chronic diseases. And all these study types are complementary. They all have their strengths and limitations, and it is the body of evidence that they jointly constitute, and which is analyzed as part of the collective expertise that makes it possible to establish strong levels of proof and arguments, of course, in favor of the causality of the studied associations. Regarding cancer, for instance, the IARC monographs have identified several carcinogenic or likely carcinogenic factors, such as alcohol, processed and red meat, and certain contaminants and mycotoxins. The World Cancer Research Fund, WCRF, and the American Institute for Cancer Research are then carrying out systematic reviews and meta-analysis and collective expertise to identify nutritional risk factors, but also protective factors for cancer. Thanks to all this, we now know with a probable to convincing level of evidence that physical activity, consumption of fruits and vegetables, dietary fiber, dairy products, and breastfeeding are protective factors against the risk of several cancer locations. And conversely, alcohol, obesity, red and processed meats, salt, and high-dose beta-carotene supplements are proven risk factors for several cancers. Regarding obesity, we now know that walking and more generally physical activity, fiber, a Mediterranean diet, breastfeeding are protective factors, and conversely, screen time, sugary drinks, and fast food diets are risk factors. Several of them are also risk or protective factors for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, such as whole grain foods, fruits and vegetables on the one hand, and red and processed meat or sugar drinks on the other. And we know now that in France, for instance, more than 40% of cancers could be avoided since they are directly linked to our lifestyle. In the top tier of modifiable risk factors, just after smoking, we find a number of nutritional factors. So alcohol, unbalanced diet, obesity, lack of physical activity, and lack of breastfeeding. At the global level, and this time more generally in terms of risk of premature death, the major involvement of nutrition is illustrated by data from the global burden of disease. Unbalanced diet, excess body weight, but also related problems such as high blood pressure, dyslipidemia, disturbances in glucose metabolisms, and etc. Are both on the top of the list in both women and men. Obviously, the situation varies greatly from one country to another. Some are more affected by problems of protein and energy deficiency, while others are more affected by junk food and excess of salt, fat, and sugar. But we also see these two problems increasingly coexisting in the same country. Based on this knowledge, public health nutrition policies have been set up. So in France, we have the National Nutrition and Health Programs. It's called the PNNS. It was launched in 2001. And an important part of this program is the dissemination of recommendations to the population. We had the famous at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, but we have many others, such as pulses at least twice a week, a small handful of nuts per day, at least 1 whole grain product per day, fish twice a week, and one of them should be fatty fish. 2 dairy products a day, prefer, of course, fats like olive oil, rapeseed oil or nut oil, and less butter, and no more than 500 grams of red meat per week, no more than 150 grams of processed meat per week, and of course, many others, and physical activity, at least 30 minutes of moderate to intense physical activity per day. These are recommendations for adults. Similar initiatives have been developed all around the world, and there are some regional differences, of course, linked to the culinary traditions of each country, or to political drivers also, and we will have the chance to explore some of them today. But overall, these recommendations share many consistent items, and for a good reason, they are based on the same international scientific evidence. Compliance with these recommendations is assessed using representative national cross-sectional studies. In France, for instance, we have the INNS, or Esteban studies, conducted by the Public Health France Agency, Santé Publique France, and the INCA studies by ANSES, the French Food Safety Agency. And both agencies are now joining their forces to prepare the future National Dietary Survey next year. These studies allow us to highlight areas of improvement. For instance, in France, 72% of people aged 18 to 54 eat fewer than the 5 recommended portions of fruits and vegetables per day. 85% do not eat nuts at all. 63% eat more than the 150 grams of recommended processed food maximum per week, and so on. So we see the margin for improvement. So, having said that, even when we know what we should do, we should eat or we should limit in theory, the practice is far less obvious. And we are confronted every day to a plethoric author for which it is not always easy to know its nutritional quality. And obviously, if you want to eat a pizza, it's better to make your own. But if, for those who want to eat an industrial pizza, the mandatory information on the back of the packaging is like hieroglyphs, so that nobody consults, and especially not the most socioeconomically disadvantaged citizen, which further widens social inequalities in health. To remedy this, our research team has created the Nutri-Score. This is the 5-color logo on the front of packaging, which gives an idea at a glance of the overall nutritional quality of food products. Its transparent and validated algorithm translates the mandatory information on the packaging in a way that is simple and accessible to everyone. It takes into account per 100 grams of product the elements, so nutrients or foods, to be favored, so fiber, proteins, fruits, vegetables, pulses. And conversely, it penalizes those to be limited, such as energy, saturated fats, sugar, salt, for instance. And an international scientific committee regularly proposes improvements to the algorithm to account for advances in science. So thanks to our team research work with over 50 scientific publications, we have been able to validate the algorithm underlying the Nutri-Score by showing in the Suvimax, Nutrinet Santé, and EPIC cohort that people consuming better classified food had a lower risk of cancer, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular diseases, and premature mortality from chronic diseases. And we also validated the understanding and impact of this logo in the general population and in different subgroups of people, such as students, patients, disadvantaged citizens. And we showed that this logo efficiently improved the nutritional quality of shopping baskets. The international scientific community has taken over with today more than 110 scientific publications demonstrating the public health benefits of the Nutri-Score. Therefore, it became the official logo in France in 2017, with already more than 900 brands involved, and as well as in 6 other European countries. The European Commission is supposed to decide on a harmonized compulsory logo later this year for all Europe. But of course, a number of powerful manufacturers whose product portfolios are predominantly in the warmer colors of the Nutri-Score are firmly opposed to it. You can find a whole of series of articles in the subject on the Nutri-Score blog, so in English, Spanish, and in French. So within this tough battle between public health and economic interest, the Nutri-Score receives strong support from the international scientific community, from learned societies and health professionals. IARC, for example, took a stand in favor of the Nutri-Score in 2021, along with more than 320 scientists internationally who signed a recent report summarizing all the evidence surrounding the Nutri-Score. Nutri-Score is also popular among children, as shown here with this magnificent supermarket that they created. It was as part of the workshop that I ran at the Cité des Sciences earlier this year in partnership with Sorbonne Paris Nord University. And so after explaining our research to them, they had to model it with Legos. And you can see here the Nutri-Score, sort of Nutri-Score, and also people using their phones to scan the barcodes to get the Nutri-Score and many other informations. And some children even mention some smartphone apps, such as the great and free application Open Food Facts. So, recommendations, nutritional education from an early age, and clearer labeling are crucial elements, but they are not sufficient. Because how can we make the right choices when we are surrounded by an environment that encourages us to overconsume excessively fatty, sugary, and salty food, ultra-processed foods, while remaining sedentary in front of our screens and watching advertising that makes us want to eat even more of these foods? On this front, there is still a long way to go. Here are some examples of pushy marketing in France. So this famous sugar brand reminding us that sugar is a plant. This advert for a famous diet, soft drinks, encouraging us to adopt a balanced lifestyle. Or these chocolate bars tempting consumers near the checkouts of a pharmacy in the middle of thermometers and throat pills. So it is therefore important not to make the consumer feel guilty or focus everything on him or her. And of course, individual determinants are important levers for action. But it is also essential to play at the same time on more macroscopic, societal, political, and legislative factors that will deeply modify the environment in which citizens live and the offer to which they have access, to enable them in practice to make the right choices. Thus, in France, public health nutrition policies has also incorporated a number of important measures in this area, such as the ban of vending machines in school or the tax on sugary drinks, for instance. So what are the perspectives? Well, we now need to go much further on two fronts, the public health policies and research. On the political side, action is urgently needed for several reasons. One of them is that social inequalities in health are drastically increasing in France. 16% of working class children are overweight and 6% are obese, compared to only 7% and 1% respectively for the children of managers. 28% of French adults reached the food and vegetable recommendation, and there are only 6% among food aid recipients. It is also important and urgent to act because our current food systems have a major impact on the environment. They account for 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, with livestock alone accounting for 15% of these emissions. And many other indicators bear witness to this impact. And Dr. Garnett this afternoon will explore this question. So, what does it mean for the future of our food systems? Is the consumption of insects going to become global? It is already part of traditional diets in some countries. Are we all going to eat synthetic meat products? So the future will undoubtedly hold some surprises, but what is important is that some concrete solutions with a high potential on impact on public health already exist today. It's not science fiction. These solutions are currently being discussed in France, at least, as part of the preparation of our National Strategy for Food, Nutrition and Climate, which is called SNOC this year, and which is giving rise to fascinating debates and key contributions from various institutions, such as the High Council for Public Health, with a goldmine of ideas for our future policies. So I won't detail them here, but I'm sure we will have some stimulating discussions this afternoon during the roundtable. Just a few leads here based on the Nutri-Score. Of course, first, make it mandatory in all food packaging in Europe to ensure a greater transparency for consumers. But it could also be displayed in all food advertising, in catering establishment, on bulk products. This is on the way normally. It could also be used for economic regulation purposes on the model of the current tax on sugary drinks. You could imagine a tax indexed to the Nutri-Score. And we could also work on several evolutions, for instance, in the future to include the very important and complementary dimension of ultra-processing. A great deal also remains to be done in terms of regulating advertising, in particularly aimed at children and teenagers, and most of whom are exposed to ads for products of poor nutritional quality. The Public Health France Agency recommends banning advertising for these products during the hours when the greatest number of minors watch television. And of course, not forgetting the regulation of digital marketing on the internet and social networks, to which in France teenagers are exposed to for almost 2 hours per day in average. So without firm and compulsory measures, it will always be very difficult to get manufacturers and distributors on board, with some playing the game and others far less so, as illustrated here with this infographic from the NGO Foodwatch. And in terms of nutritional research, where do we stand? So we went from the discovery of vitamins and minerals and the definition of recommended intakes based on the prevention of deficiencies to policies aimed primarily at ensuring energy and basic nutrient requirements, the needs are covered. In the 80s and 90s, the inclusion of chronic diseases prevention into the recommendations beyond the simple prevention of deficiencies was followed in the years 2000 by the advent of the concept of dietary patterns. So the idea that diet is a whole and that the interactions, the synergy between dietary compounds is also important. And today we've gone one step further and we are asking ourselves many questions about other non-nutritional factors in our diet, about the complexity of the mechanisms by which nutrition impacts our health, with new leads also being explored, such as the role of gut microbiota. And all these questions are precisely what we are exploring with my team, so EREN, the Nutritional Epidemiology Research Team. We are interested in dietary exposures to nutrients, but also to many other factors such as food additives, contaminants conveyed by food, and of course always as a physical activity. We study their impact on human health, including obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, but also a whole range of pathologies for which the links with nutrition are emerging, such as mental and cognitive health, dermatological and respiratory pathologies, and immunity. We investigate the mechanisms underlying these complex relationships, and we are also interested in the impact of our diet on the ecosystems. And of course, we are interested in the determinants of this nutritional behavior as levers for action toward healthier lifestyles, so psychological, economic, geographical determinants. And the aim of all this research is to propose and to test tools and public health measures that are efficient to reduce the risk of chronic diseases through nutrition. We work on the general population, but we also work in specific subgroups such as students, pregnant women, vegetarians, and patients suffering from various chronic diseases. To achieve this, we have set up a number of large-scale epidemiological studies, including the Nutrinet Santé study. So it was launched in France in 2009, and this was, at the time, the first web cohort of this size worldwide. It includes today more than 174,000 participants, aged 15 years and older, and the recruitment is still ongoing. Its originality and strength lie in the highly detailed assessment of dietary exposure and emerging nutritional behaviors. These are measured using validated tools, such as repeated 24-hour dietary records every 6 months, plus a number of additional questionnaires on organic food consumption, food packaging, cooking practices, dietary supplements, physical activity, of course, as well as information collected on factors not directly linked to diet, such as environmental exposure to at home or at work, smoking, and other lifestyle parameters. So this enables us to characterize in detail the exposome of the participants. We have also set up a biobank for a subsample of 20,000 nutrinodes containing serum, plasma, buffy coats with DNA and urine, and we are now starting to collect feces from 8,000 to 10,000 volunteers as part of the NutriGut project. So participants, of course, are followed over time, including a link with medico-administrative databases. And the Belgium part of the study has already been launched and is directly linked to our platform. And we are now happy to share our experience and know-how with PIs in other countries in order to set up a similar Nutrinet study, as it is the case, for instance, in Brazil under the coordination of Professor Carlos Monteiro. So Nutrinet is therefore a unique infrastructure for multidisciplinary research into nutrition and health. Any citizen who wants to help advanced public nutrition research can register on the study website, which can be accessed by computer, tablets, and smartphone. And during the dietary survey days, participants are asked to provide information on the type of food consumed, the portion sizes, but also on a whole range of information, such as the brand of products, whether they are organic or not, and the time of each meal. We constantly try to improve, to innovate, to make it easier for participants to enter the data and to improve the quality of the information collected. And for instance, we've recently added a module that allows participants to scan the barcodes of food consumed, providing a direct link with the Open Food Facts database, which enables us to collect a wealth of valuable information on the composition of products, the presence of certain additives, and even on their packaging. Nutrinet Santé has already given rise to several hundreds of scientific publications and thousands of media fallouts, with several direct impacts on public health policies. And in addition to the Nutri-Score discussed previously, here are a few examples of recent research results from our team. So, for instance, for the first time, we showed an association between the consumption of ultra-processed food, of which Professor Carlos Monteiro and Philip Baker will be talking about shortly, and a subsequent increased risk of several chronic diseases such as cancer, cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes. And this paper has been widely reported in the media and led to a number of parliamentary hearings here in France, and they contributed to support the evolution of the recommendations that now officially include ultra-processed food in a number of countries, including France or Brazil, for instance. Today, several dozens of epidemiological studies around the world observed links between ultra-processed food and increased risk of several outcomes, and potential mechanisms being explored right now, such as those involving the gut microbiota, which Professor Elina will be talking about. Our objective today is to understand, as part of a large research program, not only supported by the European Research Council, what are the characteristics of these ultra-processed foods that explain their impact on health. Mixtures of additives, contaminants created during processes or from packaging, disruption of the matrix and structures of food, and so on. We are now exploring these leads as part of this multidisciplinary program, combining nutritional epidemiology, notably on the Nutrinet Santé and EPIC cohorts, mechanistic epidemiology to explore the mechanisms involved using biomarkers of inflammation, oxidative stress, metabolic disruption, and microbiota, and experimental toxicological research in vivo and in vitro in collaboration with our partners, and notably Professor Barouki's lab. For the first time, we've been able to quantify the exposure to all additives consumed by the Nutrinotes. Nutrinotes are the participants to the Nutrinet Santé study, and to identify the main mixtures to which they are exposed. We are now starting to study the links between these mixtures and their possible cocktail effects and the risk of various chronic diseases. All of this is made possible by the level of detail collected in Nutrinet Santé, and since a great strength that we have collected the commercial names and brands of industrial products consumed since the launch of the cohort, which is fundamental here, given the wide variation of composition between brands for the same generic item. For instance, a chocolate cookie can have 0 to 10 different food additives. We've begun to explore certain classes of additives for which experimental studies have suggested impact on health, but for which there was little or no epidemiological data in humans so far. For instance, we've shown that intakes of nitrite additives are associated with a higher risk of type 2 diabetes, as well as high blood pressure and higher cancer risk in this cohort. We also observed associations between intakes of artificial sweeteners, including aspartame, acesulfame, potassium, and increased risk of cancer, overall, breast cancer, and obesity-related cancers. We've also observed links between exposure to artificial sweeteners and increased risk of cardiovascular diseases, and most recently, between artificial sweeteners and the risk of type 2 diabetes, again in the Nutrinet Santé cohort. So at this stage, if you're thinking, well, we might as well drink sugary drinks, well, it's not a good idea. So their harmful effects have been proven for years now on cardiometabolic health, dental caries, cavities, and NASH, for instance. But their impact on the risk of cancer is less established, though. So we have investigated this point, and we showed that consumption of sugary drinks was positively associated with the risk of overall cancer and breast cancer in Nutrinet Santé. And this also applied to fruit juices, which are very high in sugar despite their healthy image. The INRAE researchers in my team are also conducting a comprehensive research program into the health impact of eating organic food, exposure to pesticide residues, the transition toward more plant-based diets, and more generally the sustainability of our food systems. In particular, the BioNutrinet project has revealed links between the consumption of organic food and a lower risk of cancer overall, as we can see here in this slide, but also of breast cancer and non-Hodgkin lymphomas. In addition, the risk of type 2 diabetes was 35% lower in highest consumers of organic foods than in non-consumers. And so to understand these relationships and to go further, we estimated the exposure to pesticide residues, including validation in a subsample using urinary biomarkers. And we observed an association between one of the mixtures of pesticides residues and an increased risk of postmenopausal breast cancer, especially in overweight women. And in women also, another mixture of pesticides was associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. In terms of the sustainability and environmental impact of food, the Nutrinet Santé cohort has, for instance, made it possible to test the recently proposed Eat Lancet planetary health diet and to show that greater adherence to this diet was also associated with a lower risk of chronic diseases. On another topic, we showed that consumption of fruits and vegetables and consistently the corresponding intakes in terms of fiber, vitamin B9, C, and K, was associated with a lower probability of infection by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so as measured by seroprevalence. And of course, taking into account individual behaviors such as compliance with barrier gestures or number of outings per week, and so on. We are exploring a host of other themes, and that I obviously don't have time to develop here, unfortunately, but we can come back to them during the roundtable, the questions, and many colleagues who coordinate these themes are here in the room today. And so for French speakers, I invite you to watch the replay of the chair's courses and seminars also, in which we have covered all this. To conclude, our vision for research in the coming years is to move towards a three-dimensional view of the health impact of food, so nutritional aspect, but also food processing, environmental contamination, which are very complementary at the food level. A greater consideration of co-exposures, so cocktail effects, exposome-type approaches, an integration of ecological issues, of course, a consideration of other diet parameters such as nutritional circadian rhythms, an increase in the quantity and quality of data collected. And so for this, using innovative digital tools, but with all the methodological challenges that it represents. Mechanistic epidemiology, of course, exploring gut microbiota and incorporating metabolic and other multi-omics biomarkers. And I'm sure Professor Hu will provide us with some interesting insights on this topic. And this will, of course, complement observational epidemiological approaches and experimental research, and thereby provide arguments in favor of causality. Towards also a more participatory research, and also towards a greater dialogue between scientists and decision makers to optimize public health policies. Finally, we need strong public research in the field of nutrition and health. As part of this chair, we've been able to see how strong the influence of lobbies can be and how they are sometimes strongly opposed to public health. We saw this in particular during the course and seminar on the Nutri-Score with Professor Herzberg, and we will have the opportunity to address this issue on the influence of agri-food lobbies in detail this afternoon with Professor Bakers and Pettigrew. Over the next few years, the results of this public research will make it possible to strengthen the evidence base, to identify new risk and protective factors in our diet, to optimize recommendations, labeling, regulations, to improve the reliability of the information provided by applications, and to fight fake news, which are extremely toxic in this field. And more generally, this research will allow us to guide public health policies in order to improve both human and planetary health. So now, let me introduce our fabulous speakers. We are so lucky to have you here today. So, Professor Frank Hu from the Department of Nutrition, Harvard School of Public Health in Boston, will tell us about nutritional epidemiology of chronic diseases in the multi-omics era. Professor Robert Barouki from the T3S unit at INSERM and University Paris-Cité will give us an exposome perspective of food toxicology. Professor Carlos Monteiro of the Department of Nutrition, School of Public Health at the University of Sao Paulo, the creator of the NOVA classification, will tell us about ultra-processed food and human health. Professor Eran Elinav is from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel and the Microbiota and Cancer Division of DKFZ in Heidelberg, Germany. And unfortunately, he had an accident and will not be able to come in person, but he kindly accepted to give his talk by Zoom, so on the host microbiome interaction in health and disease. And so we will have him with us today virtually. Professor Philip Baker from the Faculty of Health, Institute of Physical Activity and Nutrition at Deakin University in Australia, will help us understand the global rise of ultra-processed food and the role of food systems and commercial determinants. Professor Marc Pettigrew of the Department of Public Health of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in London will show us how harmful commodity industries impact public health and public health science also. And Dr. Tara Garnett from the Environmental Change Institute of the University of Oxford will share her expertise about food and the planet to try to answer the question, is a healthy diet environmentally sustainable? So just a little bit of housekeeping rules. So each speaker will give a 30-minute talk, followed by a 10 to 15-minute question session. So I really count on you to make these sessions very dynamic and interactive. We will also have a round table in the afternoon, allowing more discussion, so more questions that you would like to address to our experts. We will have several breaks during the day. They are indicated in the program. You had it at the entrance. And so I'm very sorry, but the Collège de France did not provide coffee or food, except for speakers. So there is a great bakery just across the street, and you can find some tea, coffee, salads for noon, and of course, nice restaurants in the area. So thank you all, and I hope you will enjoy the day. And Professor Hu, the floor is yours.